Greetings Warhammer enthusiast. Before you stands a voice assistant of the podcast, dedicated to spreading the greater good. If you find this information useful, please do not hesitate to leave a like and subscribe. Together, we shall explore the depths of the Warhammer universe and share in its wonders. Magnus the Red, the demon primarch of the Thousand Suns, stands as one of the most formidable psykers in the galaxy, his power dwarfed only by the likes of Malkador the Sigilite and the Emperor himself. As a testament to his immense psychic abilities, Magnus could manipulate his size and form according to his will. He could strike down legions of foes with his psychic onslaught, and his powers were so extensive that he could single-handedly engage titans in combat. Additionally, Magnus' psychic foresight allowed him a measure of precognition. He could predict and anticipate most events, positioning himself several steps ahead of his enemies. His psychic prowess was so extraordinary that there was speculation that the Emperor intended for him to power the Golden Throne, a task that had proven lethal even for the formidable Malkador. The nature of Magnus' appearance is in itself a manifestation of his psychic might. As Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, once stated, "No one has ever seen Magnus' true form. Such is the extent of his psychic influence." In battle, Magnus typically leaned heavily on his colossal psychic power, but he was not without physical weaponry. He was often seen brandishing a gigantic khopesh named the Blade of Onnunerta and a potent energy weapon known as the Sapphire Serpenta. His attire was a suit of ornately decorated power armor, adorned with intricate engravings and wardings, known as the Horned Raiment. By the onset of the 41st millennium, Magnus had acquired new armaments befitting his status as a demon primarch. He was equipped with the Blade of Magnus and the Crown of the Crimson King, further enhancing his already considerable power and presence. Born from the genetic material of the Emperor of Mankind, Magnus the Red was one of the Primarchs, superhuman beings created to be the Emperor's sons and generals of his armies. Unlike his brothers, Magnus remembered his gestation in the Emperor's labs and his subsequent release into the galaxy. Upon his emergence, Magnus was cast adrift in the cosmos, a common experience for all Primarchs due to the Chaos God's machinations. His life pod eventually plummeted towards Prospero, a remote colony world settled by outcast psykers, individuals with psychic abilities. His arrival was like a comet blazing through the sky, crashing into the very heart of Prospero's civilization, the Central Plaza. This spectacle drew the attention of the entire colony, marking the infant Primarch's arrival as a momentous event. On Prospero, Magnus found himself in an environment unique across the Imperium of Man. The planet was a sanctuary for human psykers who sought refuge from the persecution they faced in the broader galaxy. Thus, his psychic nature did not isolate him but instead gave him a sense of belonging. In this environment, Magnus' psychic abilities flourished. A famed psyker scholar, Amorn, recognized his potential and became his mentor. Under Amorn's tutelage, Magnus' skills grew at an incredible pace. In no time, he surpassed Amorn and the other scholars in his psychic prowess, demonstrating an innate talent that hinted at his true heritage. A turning point in Magnus' development was when he performed an unprecedented feat. He peered directly into the warp, the realm of energy and emotion that psykers tap into for their powers. This action was not merely channeling the warp's energy, but observing its very essence, instantly transitioning him from student to master, exhibiting a level of psychic mastery unheard of on Prospero. Magnus' ascendancy was not only marked by his psychic mastery but also his leadership. Prospero faced a perpetual threat from the Psychnuin, psychic parasites that had been a scourge on the population for centuries. Magnus led the charge against these creatures, using his formidable powers to purge them from the planet, saving Prospero's inhabitants. This victory established Magnus as a hero, a savior who had delivered Prospero from an age-old menace. Following the victory, Magnus, driven by a desire for knowledge and beauty, dedicated himself to restoring Prospero. He spearheaded the reconstruction of Prospero's cities, transforming them into architectural marvels. Among these, the city of Tizca stood out, renowned for its breathtaking beauty and grandeur. The scholars who had survived the war against the Psychnuin, having seen Magnus' power and leadership firsthand, went on to found the cults of the Thousand Sons. These groups, made up of Prospero's psykers, dedicated themselves to the pursuit of psychic knowledge and mastery, following in the footsteps of Magnus, their mentor and guide. Magnus was a being of extraordinary psychic prowess whose mind dwelt as much in the metaphysical warp as in the physical realm. His powerful presence in this dimension of psychic energy and emotion was impossible to ignore, and inevitably attracted the attention of the Emperor of Mankind. When the Emperor arrived on Prospero, the home world of Magnus, their meeting was something beyond a first encounter. It was as though they had known each other for countless ages, such was their immediate rapport and understanding. The Thousand Sons, the Space Marine Legion created from Magnus' genetic template, were as gifted and cursed in equal measures. They were riddled with psychic mutations, reflecting Magnus' own psychic abilities. This made them powerful, yet dangerously unstable. Many within the wider Imperium looked upon these psykers with trepidation, their fear and ignorance breeding suspicion and prejudice. Despite the rising chorus of concerns, Magnus embraced his legion's psychic heritage. He not only accepted the Thousand Sons with their aberrations, but also set about guiding them, training them in the ways of the psyker, showing them how to control their burgeoning powers. During this period, a deep bond appeared to form between Magnus and the Emperor. They reached into the warp together, exploring the raw, primal energies that underpinned reality. The Emperor warned Magnus of the dangers inherent in the Empyrean, cautioning him against the chaotic entities that dwelt in this psychic realm. But in a desperate attempt to save his legion from the worsening effects of their psychic mutations, Magnus made a catastrophic pact with a being he would later discover to be Tzeentch, the chaos god of change. This pact led to the loss of Magnus' right eye, a physical manifestation of his metaphysical folly. Yet, the mutations plaguing his legion did temporarily recede, granting a temporary reprieve. Throughout the Great Crusade, Magnus was a figure of notable achievement and valor. His deeds earned him not only the admiration of many within the wider Imperium, but also the friendship of his fellow Primarchs, Horus, Lorga, and Jagatai Khan. However, his unorthodox methods and close affiliation with the Warp caused friction and fostered distrust among some of his brothers. His very nature, an early exposure to chaos during his formative years on Prospero had kindled in Magnus a unique affinity for the Warp. As the Crusade progressed, Magnus encountered cultures across the galaxy where psychics had been allowed to develop freely. Ignoring the Emperor's warnings, he gathered an assortment of arcane lore from these cultures, crafting the monumental Book of Magnus from these collected works. This accumulation of psychic knowledge and sorcery was viewed with suspicion by many, who perceived it as a dangerous pursuit that was leading Magnus further down a perilous path. The Crusade's journey took them further from Terra and deeper into regions where bizarre, warp-influenced creatures resided. The presence of such beings reflected poorly on Magnus, as his own mastery over the warp bore unsettling similarities to these warp-spawned creatures. His brothers, Laman Russ and Mortarion, already skeptical of Magnus due to his dependence on psychic powers and cunning instead of brute strength, saw their distrust heightened by these encounters. Their underlying tensions came to a head on Arc Reach Secundus, where Magnus and Russ nearly resorted to combat over the fate of the planet's great library, a repository of knowledge that Magnus coveted. Bloodshed was narrowly avoided through the intervention of Lorga, another of their brother Primarchs. The Emperor, recognizing the escalating disputes regarding the use of psychic powers, called for a council on the planet Nicaea. The outcome of this Council of Nicaea was the Emperor's declaration limiting the sanctioned use of psychic abilities to astropaths and navigators, beings essential for interstellar communication and navigation. Furthermore, the edict demanded the disbanding of the librariums, psychic conclaves within the Space Marine legions, and banned sorcery outright. This was a blow to Magnus, who saw psychic abilities as tools of enlightenment and power rather than things to be feared. Despite the Emperor's ruling, Magnus remained loyal to the Imperium. He was well aware of the risks the warp posed, understanding the danger of corruption. He even endeavored to caution his brother, Lorga, against seeking the secrets of the warp, aware of the precarious line one walks in such pursuits. Thus, amidst rising tensions and challenging edicts, Magnus stood at a critical juncture, torn between his inherent nature, his loyalty to the Emperor, and the volatile path the future held for him and his legion. The Council of Nicaea will forever be remembered as a time of judgment and division. That day, the Emperor, the omnipotent ruler of mankind, forbade the use of psychic powers and the deployment of librarians among the Astartes. Any defiance would be met with a punishment far beyond mortal understanding. This decree weighed especially heavily on the Thousand Sons and their primarch, Magnus the Red. Known for their psychic abilities, the Thousand Sons felt targeted and unfairly judged, and Magnus felt the trial was more against him than a just council. In response to the Emperor's decree, the Thousand Sons largely withdrew from the Great Crusade, gathering on their homeworld, Prospero. It was at this time that Magnus experienced a prophetic vision. He saw his brother Horus, the favored son of the Emperor, turning against their father in a rebellion that would engulf the entire Imperium in a devastating civil war. Believing in the immense power of his psychic abilities, Magnus was convinced that he could prevent this disastrous event. Upon his return to Prospero, Magnus tried to use his psychic prowess to shield Horus from any ill intent. But when this failed, he realized the urgency of warning the Emperor. The conventional methods of communication, dependent on intermediaries, seemed inadequate for the gravity of his message. Magnus was about to reveal to the Emperor that his favorite son and chief lieutenant was plotting his overthrow. Driven by a mix of duty and vanity, Magnus chose to use his psychic abilities to appear directly before the Emperor. In his pursuit to reach the Emperor, Magnus embarked on a perilous psychic journey, projecting his astral form into the chaotic realms of the warp. He breached a conduit of the Eldar webway, unknowingly allowing diamonds to infiltrate. Finally, he entered the Imperial webway, appearing in the Imperial dungeon. Magnus believed that this bold move would justify his use of psychic powers in the Emperor's eyes. However, it had precisely the opposite effect. Magnus's actions not only went against the Emperor's decree, but they also caused catastrophic damage. His breach of the webway had caused extensive damage, resulted in the loss of countless lives, and left the Imperial Palace vulnerable to warp intrusion. It also shattered the Emperor's plan to crown Magnus on the Golden Throne as the guardian of humanity as they navigated the webway. As the Emperor looked upon Magnus with sadness, the enormity of his actions dawned upon the Primarch, leading to his sudden disappearance. Some accounts suggest that the Emperor, enraged by the ruination of his grand design, dismissed Magnus's warning and banished him outright. On his homeworld, Prospero, a distraught Magnus ruminated on his actions. He realized how he had been manipulated by the great powers of the warp. Overwhelmed by regret for his hubris and the dire consequences it had brought upon his legion, Magnus decided to await his father's punishment. That retribution was not long in coming, as the Emperor ordered Layman Russ to lead a fleet to Prospero with orders to bring Magnus back in chains. Magnus the Red, determined to accept his punishment without resistance, went to extraordinary lengths to ensure his legion did the same. He erected a psychic barrier around Prospero, cutting off astropathic communication and blinding the precognitive abilities of the Corvidi. He divided the Thousand Sons fleet into 4 battle groups, each dispatched to different corners of the galaxy with sealed orders. His intention was to keep the knowledge of the imminent Imperial attack from his men to prevent them from fighting back. In his mind, this was their, and his, final chance at redemption. The arrival of the Imperial battle fleet at Beta Garman marked the beginning of this punishment. A formidable assembly of hundreds of ships from the Space Wolves, Adeptus Custodes, and Sisters of Silence descended upon Prospero, their grey, gold, and black hulls filling the star-filled sky. The sight was one of awe and dread, as though the very heavens had turned against the world below. Meanwhile, the Warmaster Horus, now a pawn of chaos, had gotten wind of the Sanction fleet. He saw in this an opportunity to further his own treacherous plans. Contacting his brother, Daemon Russ, he cunningly swayed him from his initial orders to return Magnus to Terra. Horus convinced him that such an endeavor would be a waste of time and effort. It was a gambit, as Horus wished to ensure that Magnus would not leave Prospero alive. This would further his own cause and maintain the element of surprise for his upcoming rebellion. As part of his plot, Horus dispatched reinforcements to aid Russ, 5,000 legionnaires from his own sons of Horus, and 12 titans from the fearsome Legio Mortis. These reinforcements, unbeknownst to Russ, were meant to guarantee Magnus' downfall and further complicate the Emperor's plans. Yet even as his forces prepared for battle, Russ sought to reach out to Magnus one last time. He attempted to communicate with his wayward brother via Caspar Ansbach Horsa, whom he believed to be a hidden one of the Thousand Sons. Russ declared the approach of his fleet, urging Magnus to evacuate civilians and surrender. His plea, however, fell on deaf ears, for Horsa was not a hidden one, but a puppet of chaos masquerading as one. With his attempt at peace unheeded and unknowing of the deceit at play, Russ had no choice but to order the attack. The stage was set, and the fate of the Thousand Sons hung in the balance. Unbeknownst to them all, the tragic saga of Magnus the Red and his loyal Thousand Sons was only just beginning. The grim dance of war was about to commence on Prospero, a testament to the far-reaching consequences of treachery and hubris. Engulfed by cosmic horrors, the world of Prospero found itself facing its final reckoning as imperial vessels closed in, their hulls bristling with weapons poised to rain destruction upon the planet. Prospero's orbital defenses, once thought invincible, crumbled within moments under the onslaught of torpedo attacks and long-range fire. Surviving stations were methodically swept aside as the Imperial fleet continued its merciless advance. The Space Wolves vessels, once allies now turned executioners, loomed ominously in orbit. Their armada commenced a merciless saturation bombardment. Magma bombs, directed energy weapons, mass drivers, and even ballistic cannons were hurled upon the world below. The devastation was catastrophic. Mountains leveled, seas evaporated, and the very bedrock reshaped by the fierce bombardment. The winds that swept across the planet carried the scent of heated metals and oils, an ominous testament to the destruction wrought upon Prospero. However, one city remained defiant amidst the devastation. Tzeentch, the jewel of Prospero, shielded by the telekinetic might of the Raptora cult's Thousand Sons. The shield, as impregnable as the minds of those who maintained it, weathered the fearsome onslaught, holding back the horrors of the bombardment. Amidst the ensuing chaos, the Skyguard and Spireguard, along with local militias, fought back. However, the Space Wolves, driven by Daemon Russ himself, managed to maintain their brutal advance. The arrival of the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence disrupted the psychic powers of the Thousand Sons, shifting the battle in favor of the invaders. Despite their best efforts, the Thousand Sons were pushed back, their ranks thinning under the unrelenting assault. In a fierce battle at Tzeentch's port, Fael Tauren's Seventh Fellowship faced the relentless Space Wolves. Forced to unleash their psychic powers, they initially turned the tide, but Tauren lost control of his newfound abilities and exploded in a catastrophic warp flame. The devastation spread, causing sympathetic deaths among the Thousand Sons and triggering a chain reaction that saw Captain Colophis and the Titan Canis Vertex fall. The survivors, led by Ahriman, retreated and fortified their defenses. However, the sight of Daemon Russ leading an overwhelming assault forced Ahriman into a desperate psychic duel with the Rune Priest, other Wordmake. Despite emerging victorious and revealing the tragic truth behind the battle to Wordmake, Ahriman was met with the harsh reality of his legion's defeat. Spitefully, he cast Wordmake's soul into the warp, ready to face his own fate. As the battle for Tzeentch's port raged on, Ahriman, the chief librarian, saw his forces shrink to a mere 1,500 sons. Nevertheless, they held their ground, even as the Space Wolves released their Wolfen, part-armored marines resembling giant wolves, causing considerable havoc. In this dire hour, Magnus the Red intervened, descending from the pyramid of Photep. With a show of raw power, he drove back the Space Wolves, leaving only Daemon Russ, the Wolf King, to face him. As Magnus battled his brother, he sent Ahriman to retrieve the Book of Magnus, foreseeing his own fall. Magnus' power was formidable. He created a lighting cage around them, blasted Russ with energy, and even turned the moat surrounding the pyramid into bubbling acid to prevent enemies from crossing. Nevertheless, the battle was arduous. Daemon Russ, resistant to the psychic attacks, managed to crack Magnus' armor and wound him. In the heat of the battle, Magnus pierced Russ with a blade of pure thought, but Russ' wolf companions intervened, injuring the Red King. Russ took the opportunity to shatter Magnus' arm and stab his remaining eye, leaving him grievously wounded. Just as Russ was about to deliver the killing blow, Magnus used Ahriman to execute a master spell, causing all the 1,000 suns to disappear from Prospero. While the Space Wolves had technically won the battle, the remaining 1,000 suns had managed to evade certain death. Magnus and his legion vanished into the warp to the planet of the sorcerers, a result of a ritual he had co-prepared with Ahriman. In the warp, Magnus found boundless psychic powers and a chance for retribution. Embracing chaos, Magnus took everything he had, his knowledge from Prospero, his experiences from the Imperium, and plunged it into the warp permanently. On Prospero, the Space Wolves showed no mercy, killing all remaining inhabitants and devastating the planet's surface. The only survivors were those 1,000 suns who were not present during the destruction, like Mens Cowliston and his troops, who returned to find their home world lifeless. In his battle with Russ, Magnus' physical form was destroyed, leading to his existence as an entity of corporeal warp energy within the Eye of Terra, alongside his legion. However, this transformation fragmented him into multiple shards, each operating independently of the others. Among the scattered shards of Magnus the Red, one revealed itself to Jagatai Khan, Primarch of the White Scars, as an ethereal projection amidst the ruins of Prospero. Emerging from the ashes of the desolated world, this shard delivered a message to its brother in arms, imploring him to finally cast his lot in the raging war that consumed the galaxy. This was a significant moment, as the White Scars were among the few legions still wavering on the fence, their allegiance uncertain. Thus, the choice Jagatai Khan made would inevitably have profound implications on the course of the war. Simultaneously, another fragment of the Crimson King found its way onto the Salamander's battle barge Charybdis, albeit in a different guise. Materializing as a mental projection, this shard engaged Captain Artellus Numion in a cryptic conversation. Questioning the Salamander about his willingness to sacrifice everything to see their Primarch, Vulcan, resurrected, the shard guided their ship through the ruined storm to Nocturne. Its poignant words to Numion eventually stirred in him a fatal resolve, to willingly sacrifice his own life to breathe life back into Vulcan. Thus, this fragment of Magnus played a pivotal role in the resurrection of Vulcan and the subsequent course of the Salamander's destiny. Meanwhile, the primary form of Magnus languished on the planet of sorcerers, his essence slowly dissipating. Witnessing the gradual deterioration of their Primarch, Ahriman, the Thousand Suns' chief librarian, took upon himself the monumental task of gathering the scattered shards to restore Magnus. Guided by a cryptic vision, Ahriman set out on a journey through space and time, managing to reclaim 4 of the 5 shards. Each reclaimed shard breathed new life into Magnus, restoring his lost powers and arresting his disintegration. Another significant shard was embedded in the planet Prospero itself. Reflecting Magnus' neutrality in the Grand War that ravaged the galaxy, this shard attempted to persuade Jagatai Khan, the Primarch of the White Scars, to choose a side in the monumental conflict. Unfortunately, the Khan, conflicted and distraught, destroyed this fragment of Magnus. Yet another shard found its home in the ashes of Callista Eris, a powerful psyker who succumbed to a cataclysmic vision of the Horus heresy. Contained within an urn carried by Lemuel Gorman, this shard represented the agony and sacrifice associated with the psyker's gift. On Agoru, a shard that represented Magnus's martial prowess and warrior spirit lingered, symbolizing the Primarch's unwavering bravery and battle-hardened resilience. In the ashes of the ruling council on Nicaea, where Magnus's psychic practices were condemned, a shard was formed. This piece of the Primarch bore the heavy weight of betrayal, etching the scar of his judgment into its psychic essence. In the fabled Athenaeum of Callimachus, a shard was found, brimming with the essence of manipulation, secrets, and change. This shard latched itself onto the Athenaeum, subtly planting the seed for a second rubric, a monumental spell of transformation, in the mind of Ahriman, the chief librarian of the Thousand Sons. Unbeknownst to the legionnaire Astraeus the Oathtaker, a shard of Magnus, representing the raw, unfettered wrath and vengeance of the Primarch, had embedded itself within him, transforming him into a near-demonic entity. It was not until the second rubric was cast that this fragment was finally absorbed by the Crimson King. Finally, a shard existed within the mind palace of Ahriman himself. Like a silent observer, this shard bore witness to the decisions and actions of Ahriman, serving as a silent reminder of the indelible bond between the Primarch and his favored son. As the years passed, many of these shards were recombined with Magnus by the machinations of Ahriman during the Horus heresy. Yet, despite their reclamation, the saga of Magnus the Red and his psychic shards was far from over. Each fragment had their own tale to tell, their own impact on the vast universe around them. Through their journey, the shards continued to influence the path of the Thousand Sons and the unfolding destiny of the Imperium itself. On Terra, the final holdout of the Emperor, a shard was kept under the vigilant watch of Malcador the Sigillit, the Emperor's closest confidant. This fragment echoed Magnus's nobility and virtue, standing as a testament to the Primarch's initial loyalty to the Emperor. The reformed Magnus, determined to reclaim this fragment, declared his support for Horus's assault on Terra. This shard would eventually be fused with Revuel Arvida, a loyalist Thousand-Son sorcerer, creating a new being named Aeneas, a fusion of Arvida and the Primarch's nobility. With a revitalized Magnus at the helm, the Thousand Sons rallied to answer Horus' call, amassing on Ullanor to prepare for the impending march on Terra. As the siege loomed nearer, Magnus and Ahriman found themselves returning to the ruins of Prospero, in search of the demon Shaitan. Their plan was to utilize its potent power against the Emperor's psychic defenses surrounding Terra. On Prospero, Magnus was confronted with the consequences of his past actions. In particular, his deeds on the world of Morningstar weighed heavily on him. There, Magnus had committed acts that he had deemed necessary but which had ended in tragedy and, to make matters worse, he had subsequently erased the Thousand Sons' memories of it. Upon revealing these events to Ahriman, the chief librarian was deeply disappointed, straining the bond between the Primarch and his most trusted lieutenant. This confrontation with the ghosts of his past marked a turning point for Magnus, and served as a harsh reminder of the heavy price of his quest for knowledge and power. Over time, Magnus found himself aligning with the traitor Astartes, a coalition led by his brother, Horus. Bitter and vengeful against the Emperor who he felt had betrayed him, Magnus lent his support to the cause, contributing his substantial psychic might to the siege of Terra. He was a crucial player in the war council, held aboard the traitor flagship, Vengeful Spirit, lending his wisdom on how to dismantle the Emperor's psychic barrier that protected Terra from demonic incursion. In the early stages of the siege, Magnus was conspicuously absent, with his whereabouts and activities unknown to even the most knowledgeable and informed, like Malcador the Sigillit. However, as the battle waged on and the Lion's Gate spaceport succumbed to the traitors, rumors started to circulate about Magnus's presence on the battlefield. Malcador believed that Magnus was channeling his formidable psychic abilities to undermine the Emperor's defenses. In a surprising move, Magnus ordered the vessel Photep to assist the Loyalists' escape during a raid on Luna to secure the Magna Mater. Alpharius, the enigmatic Alpha Legion Primarch, revealed that Magnus had previously requested him to spare the life of Nicona Sharrokin, who eventually managed to escape with the Magna Mater. Magnus found an unlikely ally in his brother Mortarion, the Death Lord, during the assault on the Colossi Gate. Sensing the pain Mortarion was in, Magnus used his knowledge to teach his brother to better control his warp powers. Yet, in reality, this act of kindness was a calculated move, meant to manipulate Mortarion into launching an attack that would provide cover for Magnus's covert infiltration into the Imperial Dungeon. Following the defeat of the traitors at the Saturnine Wall, Magnus decided it was time to make his move. He gathered all 9,000 of his 1,000 sons on Terra for an audacious assault on the western hemispheric region of the Emperor's palace. As the battle erupted, Magnus joined the fray, his psychic might causing a breach in the palace's defenses. Nevertheless, their progress was halted by Bodvar Bjarki and his Space Wolves, who bravely defended the palace alongside Atok Abademi, Berek Zytos, and Ijan Gargo. Under the cover of this diversion, Magnus and his closest confidants, Ahriman, Menkora, Amorn, and Atrahasis, slipped into the Sanctum Imperialis, the heart of the palace. Disguised as blood angels through psychic cloaking, they maneuvered through the Great Observatory, saving a group of refugees from Phosphex bombs in the process. As they delved deeper into the bowels of the palace, they finally encountered Malkador and Olivia Surika at the edge of an expansive underground lake. Here, Malkador, ever the master manipulator, challenged Magnus to a game of regicide with Surika, in what seemed like an attempt to sway the Crimson King back to the Emperor's cause. The revelation that the lost shard of Magnus was no longer accessible, having been implanted into Janus, drove the Primarch into a fit of rage, causing him to lash out and seemingly kill Malkador. The aftershock of his own actions left Magnus shaken. Nonetheless, he remained resolute in his decision to proceed to the Imperial throne room, ready to face and eliminate the Emperor himself, marking the culmination of his journey from loyal son to defiant traitor. The journey deeper into the heart of the Imperial dungeon continued, with Magnus and his confidants marching through the echoing halls. Their progress was interrupted by an ethereal projection of the Emperor, known as Revelation, in the grandeur of the Hall of Victories. Revelation guided them to their ultimate destination, the throne room, where the Emperor resided on the Golden Throne. Standing before his father, the once proud and loyal son now filled with resentment and anger, Magnus steeled himself to fulfill the vow he had made, to slay his father. With a surge of power, he obliterated the projection of Revelation, his staff pulsating with energy, poised to deliver the fatal blow to the Emperor. Yet, before he could strike, he was intercepted by Vulcan. As his 1,000 sons clashed with Vulcan's Drakwood and Bjarki's pack, the Emperor's eyes opened. Suddenly, Magnus found himself floating through the ethereal realms alongside his father, witnessing the rise and fall of the countless empires that painted the history of the galaxy. The Emperor presented him with a vision of a future where the Primarchs remained loyal to the Imperium, where the last frontier in the galaxy was conquered in the name of mankind. In this future, Magnus sat upon the Golden Throne, powering the Imperial webway. His soul was immersed in bliss as it journeyed through the Immaterium alongside the Emperor, exploring the bounds of cosmic knowledge. The Emperor suggested that this future could still come to pass. Magnus could reclaim his position among the Loyalists, leading a new legion prepared especially for him. Together, the father and son duo could expel the traitors from Terra and undertake the Great Scouring. The catch, however, was steep. The 1,000 sons, damned due to the rampant flesh change, could not follow Magnus back into the Emperor's embrace. They were destined to be purged. The price for his return was too much for Magnus to bear. He lashed out at the Emperor, once again interrupted by Vulcan. As the two Primarchs engaged in a fierce duel, Magnus nearly overpowered the Salamander's Primarch. However, the timely intervention and self-sacrifice of Berek Zytos gave Vulcan the upper hand, allowing him to subdue the Crimson King. As Vulcan readied to deliver the final blow, Magnus made a desperate decision. He surrendered himself entirely to the powers of chaos, ascending to a new ethereal form. Triggering the antidemonic wards of the Imperial dungeon, he and his sons were expelled from the place. Now, Magnus was irrevocably committed to the cause of the traitors. His journey from a loyal son to a defiant rebel had reached its conclusion. When Magnus re-emerged from his chaotic transformation, he was an avatar of Tzeentch, with wings stretching towards the heavens and cloven hooves marking his ascension to a new realm of existence. His next destination was the Imperial Webway, where he planned to conduct a psychic ritual that would drain the remaining strength of the Emperor. This would make it possible for diamonds to materialize even within the sanctity of the Sanctum Imperialis. With the threat of his brother's actions looming over the Eternity Gate, Malcador dispatched Vulcan to confront Magnus, instructing him to ignore the lies and taunts that Magnus would undoubtedly throw his way. And thus, Vulcan set off on his journey to the impossible city within the Webway, where he would face off against his brother. Upon arriving, Vulcan found himself subjected to a barrage of illusions and manipulations from Magnus, including a vivid vision of the burning of Prospero. Yet, Vulcan remained steadfast, refusing to allow his brother's deceptions to sway him. The inevitable clash of the two brothers was at hand. In the early stages of the battle, Vulcan's attacks seemed to hit nothing but smoke. It quickly became evident that the real Magnus was hiding behind a psychic barrier, engaged in his ritual to weaken the Emperor. Seizing the opportunity, Vulcan struck the barrier, already strained from Magnus's ritual, causing it to shatter and forcing Magnus to try and eliminate Vulcan directly to complete his work. Despite the incredible range of lethal methods Magnus employed, from beheading Vulcan with his khopesh, suffocating him by turning his lungs to amber, draining his blood, to immolating him with psychic fire, each attempt proved fruitless. The perpetual Vulcan would regenerate each time, resuming his assault on Magnus. As time wore on, Magnus grew more desperate, even attempting to enter Vulcan's mind and justify his actions. But Vulcan was not swayed by Magnus's reasoning, chastising him for his reckless use of sorcery that led to his servitude to chaos. In the depths of the Webway, Vulcan stood over Magnus, hammer raised to deliver the final blow. But, in that moment, he hesitated, even with the Emperor's voice urging him to kill his brother. Seeing his opportunity, Magnus released the spell he had been preparing, aiming to disassemble Vulcan at a genetic level. As Vulcan began to disintegrate, he summoned the last of his strength to swing his hammer, Eudricule, smashing Magnus's head and banishing him into the warp. The turning point for the Thousand Sons came amidst the grim tide of the Horus heresy. Seduced by the intoxicating allure of the powers they sought to master, the Legion committed the ultimate act of betrayal against the Emperor. They sought patronage under Tzeentch, the chaos god of change, the architect of fate. As they knelt before their newfound deity, Mutation, the spectre that had long haunted the Legion, re-emerged with renewed vigor, spreading through their ranks like a wildfire. The crisis reached its crescendo with the ascension of Magnus to a Daemon Prince, marking a pivotal transformation for both the Primarch and his Legion. Deeply troubled by the accelerating degeneration, Ahriman, a renowned sorcerer of the Legion, convened a conclave of his most potent peers. In a desperate bid to halt the mutation, they engineered a colossal spell, a grand design promising purity and a cessation to their uncontrolled transformation. Unleashing the spell resulted in a cataclysm of such magnitude that even the diamonds of the warp recoiled from its raw power. A tempest of blue and yellow lightning descended upon the planet of sorcerers, striking down every marine in a symphony of destruction. The spectacle reached such a fever pitch that Magnus himself was compelled to intervene, bringing the calamitous spell to a halt. In a cruel twist of fate, Ahriman's spell proved to be both a spectacular triumph and a harrowing disaster. The Marines gifted with psychic talents found their abilities greatly magnified, a blessing they hadn't dared dream of. However, for the vast majority of the Thousand Sons, who possessed meager or no psychic potential, the spell served as an indiscriminate reaper. Their physical forms were obliterated, reduced to mere dust, while their spirits were trapped within their armor. The once protective gear transformed into their eternal prisons, the joints magically sealed, leaving no avenue for their spirits to escape. Thus, the Thousand Sons, in their pursuit of purity, had inadvertently damned themselves for eternity. Since the casting of Ahriman's spell, the Thousand Sons' ranks have been filled with these Rubric Marines. Bereft of their own will, they are led by the few sorcerers who survived the spell intact. These sorcerers serve as their guides and motivators, leading their damned brethren into battle and directing their actions. Thus, the Thousand Sons continue their existence, trapped in a cruel mockery of life, forever damned by the very spell that sought to save them. Enraged by the terrible consequences of the spell, Magnus summoned Ahriman and his council to face his wrath. He chastised them fiercely, blaming them for the grievous condition of their brethren. When Ahriman dared to counter Magnus's accusations, an inevitable confrontation ensued. The encounter was predictably one-sided, with Ahriman, despite his power, no match for his furious Primarch. Magnus overpowered him, preparing to strike him down once and for all. Before Magnus could deliver the fatal blow that would end Ahriman, a chilling revelation echoed through the atmosphere. An ominous voice filled the air, the words resonating within Magnus' consciousness. This was the voice of Tzeentch, the deity they had pledged their allegiance to. The message was clear, and its implications were horrific. Magnus and his legion were but mere pawns in a grand scheme woven by Tzeentch himself. This epiphany abruptly halted Magnus in his tracks. The comprehension of his role, his subservience to the whims of Tzeentch, was an unbearable revelation. He was not the grand orchestrator of his destiny, as he had once believed. Instead, he was a piece in a grand, cosmic game, and his every action had been manipulated and guided by the invisible hand of Tzeentch. Ahriman was spared, not due to any residual affection Magnus might have held for him, but because of the puppet strings being tugged by their god. Magnus sent Ahriman and his council on a seemingly endless quest. Their mission, to comprehend the unfathomable mind of Tzeentch. They were condemned to wander the galaxy, eternally seeking relics of lost psychic prowess and knowledge, their lives turned into a paradox of both punishment and divine purpose. Despite his newfound understanding of Tzeentch's machinations, Magnus was unable to contain his fury. The legion he had sacrificed so much for, his legion of scholars, was now a hollow shell, the members reduced to thoughtless automatons. He was stricken with the loss of his homeworld and the disarray of his legion. In his desolation, he climbed to the summit of his tower, issuing a vow that echoed that of Horus, a vow filled with despair and the promise of destruction. Magnus, like Horus, pledged to set the galaxy aflame.
In the following segment, we will delve deeper into the deeds of Magnus the Red, now as the Daemon Prince of Tzeentch, and his influence on the Warhammer 40k universe.